The left would love to see us go to nationwide vote by mail. Frankly, the proposals, and there have been formal proposals by members of Congress to actually push money at the states, say, please go to vote by mail. And you notice only one party is doing that because the Democrats understand that under vote by mail, it's going to be very easy to cheat. So how do we go about voting? And we've actually seen some elections canceled as a result of this China virus. I thought we'd talk about it with Hans von Spakovsky, who's a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation and on the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. I wish that had gone further. Hans, welcome back to the program.
Lars, thanks for having me back.
So you wrote about this, and you said, what's the best way to conduct elections in the time of an epidemic? No sign that this is going to be over anytime soon, and even with states reopening, we're sure to be under some kinds of limitations. Let's hope as small as possible, even by the time we get to November. So is there a way of quickly reforming the system that gives us an accurate answer on elections and doesn't allow for the opportunities of fraud by anybody? I've said the Democrats seem to cheat more than the Republicans, but even if you don't buy that partisan view, I don't want opportunities for anybody to cheat.
Yeah, and it's not just the ability to cheat with absentee ballots. The problem, of course, being that they're voted outside the review and supervision of election officials, but it's just simply that the U.S. Postal Service doesn't always do a good job. Literally millions of absentee ballots that are sent out by states get misdirected. Many ballots get rejected once they come back because there are all kinds of information you have to provide with the ballot, and if you miss any of that, your ballot's going to get rejected. But I think what people need to keep in mind is that, look, there's all kinds of safety protocols that the states could put in place in the polling places that would still allow people to vote with little or no chance of catching the COVID-19 virus. And anybody who doubts that, look, Wisconsin just held an election. They included in-person voting, and they put in extensive safety measures, everything from 6-foot social distancing lines for the voters, disposable pens. They had hand sanitizing stations inside the polls, outside the polls, right before you went into the voting booth, right when you came out of the voting booth. And they had 1.5 million people cast a ballot. And so far, there's not any cases that have been solidly traced back to people catching the COVID-19 virus because they went to the election. And if people think that's unique, I just saw a report, Lars, you can believe it, today, put out by South Korean news sources. They held a nationwide election on April 15th. 29 million people voted, and they put out a report today saying that health authorities have not traced a single case of COVID infection to the election.
No, that's great evidence because, Hans, I know that people are concerned about any kind of contact at this point. But I think you're right that if you take the right kinds of steps, that you can probably do this. I think society's going to have to change a bit in how we interact with people, and there's going to be a new norm. I told my wife last night, I said, as this was all getting rolling in late January and early February, before we'd seen any big reactions about the time of the president's flight ban from China, I said, I realized I walked into the elevator lobby from the parking garage where I park when I go to the studio, but I'm not at the studio these days. And I said I was thinking about it because I thought if you walked up, to board an elevator and you walked up behind a man or a woman and you stood, say, 2 inches away from them, you weren't actually touching them, but you were standing sort of in their space, they would have a reaction to that. It may be that our reactions are going to have to be a little broader than that going forward, that we become uncomfortable when somebody gets, 4 or 5 feet away. And if we see somebody not wearing a mask or whatever, depending on the circumstance, you may say, you know what, I don't want to be around you. The same way I would imagine that if somebody starts sneezing or coughing and not covering their sneeze or cough, even in the pre-China virus times, you would see people move away from that person saying, I don't want to be in your spray cloud from your disease any more than you want to be in mine. So, and yet I think that these people on the left are going to try to use this to justify, let's go to a different system. And you mentioned the Postal Service. I've been talking about them a bit lately because they're begging for a big multi-billion-dollar bailout because they've been in financial trouble for a long time. First-class mail's been disappearing for a long time, and with the lockdown, it's disappearing even more, amazingly enough. So I think by the time we get to the fall election, I'm not even sure if the post office is still going to be on 2 feet.
Oh, no, I think you're right about that. And what folks need to understand is that, look, right now, if states believe because of the health situation they need to conduct their elections by mail, they've already got all the rules and laws in place and state laws to do that. But what's been going on in Washington, for example, is liberals pushing bills to override the state security protocols that states have in place for absentee ballots. And to just give you a quick example of this, the bill that Nancy Pelosi pushed said that states would have to accept not just absentee ballots that are postmarked by the U.S. Postal Service by the end of Election Day, but they would also have to accept absentee ballots that were signed by the voter by the end of Election Day. Well, how in the world could any election official ever verify that the voter actually signed it before the end of Election Day and didn't wait until after Election Day to see, well, what are the preliminary results? You know, how should I vote depending on the vote count? I mean, that's a foolish change and one that's not needed unless you want to give people the ability to manipulate election results.
And I think that's exactly what they want to do. Hans, anything else that we should know about this? Because the idea seemed to have some, currency that they were getting somewhere with it a couple of weeks ago, and I've heard it to some extent die out. That either means it's dead or it means that it's just sitting out there like a time bomb waiting to go off. Are they still pushing this agenda, hoping to get it through the Congress?
Well, Nancy Pelosi said she's going to push it again, but now they're filing litigation in the states to try to get judges to order this to happen. New Mexico, for example, just a week or so ago, the New Mexico court said, well, no, we're not going to order election officials to go to an all-mail election. So now they can't do it through the democratic process, so they're trying it through judicial fiat. Great.
So we're going to do things. I hate to see this, but Hans, there's a pattern with the left. They have, for the longest time, they've found they can't get anywhere with the people in votes at the local level. They can't get anywhere with state legislatures for the most part. They can't get anywhere with Congress. So then they start going to the courts, and they want to turn America into a government of courts where all significant policy decisions are made not by a president or a Congress, but by the Supreme Court, unelected, chosen but unelected, and not answerable in any direct way to the public. And it's such an undemocratic idea from the Democratic Party.
It is anti-democratic. You can't say anything else, but that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, because they want to take it away from the actual elected representatives of the people, because they've found that when those representatives do crazy things, the people tend to throw them out of office and replace them with people who will actually be represented. The last thing I think Americans want to do, even on the left, is have a bunch of judges who cannot be pulled out of office, at least the federal judges can, and have them making all the decisions. Hans, thanks so much for your work on the Election Commission, and thanks for what you do at Heritage. We appreciate it.
Sure, thanks for having me.